Admiral Brewer had never considered himself a military genius, but as he hovered before the Galactic Council, his gelatinous body shaking with barely suppressed excitement, he was convinced he had stumbled upon a weapon that would never fail. A perfect plan to conquer Earth in seconds. "Dear Council members," Blur announced, his voice modulator struggling to maintain a professional tone, "I present to you Operation Wine and Yours." A confused mumbling rippled through the room of foreign dignitaries. More tentacles twitched in confusion. While some nodded in mild disappointment at yet another Blur presentation, he urged, "Hear me out." Blur gestured to his nervous science advisor, Pipsqueak, to move on to the next slide. "Our surveillance has revealed that humans are particularly fond of a fermented beverage they call wine. They celebrate with it, gift it to one another, and even have entire ceremonies dedicated to its consumption." High Counselor Jix, a towering mantis-like creature, clicked her mandibles skeptically. "And how does this help us conquer Earth?" Blur stopped dramatically. "Because humans consider wine sacred. They store their best vintages for decades, build entire rooms to store their collections, and, most importantly, they never doubt that their precious wines can be spoiled." Pipsqueak, a cowardly creature who looked like what would happen if you combined a chocolate cake with a stressed accountant, adjusted his datapad. "According to our research, humans consume around 24 billion liters of wine every year. If we introduce our latest mind control compounds into their wine, we could control an entire species in a matter of months." Blur triumphantly crossed his gelatinous arms. Some council members changed color in approval, while others waved their appendages in traditional gestures of appreciation. "But, of course," a gruff voice came from behind, "if we tamper with their wine, humans will notice." Blur's gelatinous form jiggled. "Ah, that's the best part. Our scientists have developed a compound that cannot be detected by human senses." "Pipsqueak, tell them the test results." Pipsqueak cleared his throat, or whatever passed for one in his species. "We've successfully replicated the molecular structure of tannins, natural compounds found in wine. Our mind control agent binds perfectly to these molecules, making it undetectable by conventional means. And the best part," Blur barely contained his excitement, "the longer the mixture ages, the stronger our control becomes, just like their prized wines." Counselor Zix's antennae moved thoughtfully. "I must admit, Admiral, this plan shows unexpected promise. How soon can we start?" "Our agents are already on Earth, disguised as wine critics and vineyard workers. We can start producing the wine and have it ready for distribution immediately." The Council voted unanimously to approve the plan, though several members had already placed bets on how spectacularly it would fail. After all, they were dealing with Blur, the same admiral who once tried to conquer a planet using weaponized poetry. When the room emptied, Pipsqueak found his boss. "Their biology is so unique and funny," Pipsqueak remarked. Blur waved his gelatinous appendage dismissively. "What's the worst that can happen? It's just grape juice with a little alcohol. How resistant can humans be to our most powerful mind-altering drug?" Pipsqueak updated his resume. Something told him he'd be looking for a new job very soon. Agent Glorp, leader of the Earth infiltration team, had begun to question his life choices. Currently disguised as a human wine critic named Gerald Snutsworth, he stood at a prestigious Bordeaux wine tasting event, desperately trying to remember which end of the wine glass to drink from. "Oh yes," he announced to his fellow critics, swirling the red liquid in what he hoped was a professional manner. The other critics nodded, detecting certain grape notes, and perhaps a bit too much grape tang. Whoever programmed the human infiltration protocols had done a great job of making the wine critic sound pretentious. It certainly made blending in easier. Meanwhile, in Napa Valley, Agent Splat was having her own crisis. Disguised as a vineyard worker named Barbara, she'd spent 3 hours trying to figure out how to operate a simple grape crusher without arousing suspicion. You just put the grapes in the top, she asked her supervisor for the 5th time. Yes, Barbara, the supervisor sighed, just like the past 4 times. Are you sure you put your winemaking experience on your resume? Oh yes, absolutely, she replied quickly. I made tons of wine in Nebraska. Nebraska? The supervisor stared at her for a long time before walking away, muttering something about employment standards. It wasn't just the agents who were struggling. Back at Alien Command, Pipsqueak sent an urgent work report to his superior. He'd emphasized that they needed to recalibrate their tactics, but somehow every agent kept messing up. One even tried to drink directly from a fermented tank. Meanwhile, Glop, who had been running a wine blog, found that his reviews always cited grape notes as the dominant flavor. After what seemed like an eternity of pretending to understand viticulture, the mission was finally a success. Every major wine-producing region on Earth had been successfully contaminated with the mind-controlling compound. Pipsqueak reported, Admiral, I think the wine and food are done, though we should review the possible side effects. Excellent, Blur interrupted, his gelatinous form practically vibrating with anticipation. Now we wait for the humans to do what they do best. Drink themselves into submission, sir. About that, our agents have reported some concerning observations about human alcohol consumption patterns. Not now, Pipsqueak. This is my moment of triumph. Nothing can possibly go wrong. Pipsqueak added updating LinkedIn profile to his to-do list right under researching witness protection programs. The alien observation team huddled around their monitors, watching eagerly as humans across the globe began consuming their contaminated wine. It was New Year's Eve, statistically one of Earth's highest wine consumption dates. Any moment now, Admiral Blorp muttered, his gelatinous form practically pressed against the screen. Any moment they'll all become our willing slaves. 3 hours later, the only thing that had changed was Blur's increasingly agitated shade of purple. Perhaps we should increase magnification, suggested an analyst, adjusting their view screen of a particularly rowdy New Year's party in Sydney. Maybe the mind control is too subtle to see on screen. A group of humans was demonstrating their complete lack of mind control by doing something called the conger while singing off-key. Sir. Pipsqueak ventured nervously. I'm receiving some unusual reports from our field agents. Not now, Blur snapped. I'm trying to detect signs of submission to our will, yes, but, sir, according to Agent Glop, the humans are showing absolutely no effects. In fact, they seem to be drinking more than usual. His last report mentioned something called a wine fountain at a wedding in Venice. Impossible. Our mind control compound is the most potent in the galaxy, even the mighty Zorks of Bijou. I succumbed after a single drop, sir. Another analyst called out, you might want to see this footage from a wine tasting in France. The screen showed their agent still maintaining his Snorth persona, watching in horror as a human sommelier downed an entire bottle of their most concentrated batch, only to declare it a bit young but showing promise. It could use another decade in the cellar. How BL's voice modulator cracked. How, sir, another screen lit up, this one showing a wine festival in Argentina. The humans are mixing our contaminated wine with something they call fruit juice to make something called sangria. They're serving it in buckets. Pipsqueak cleared his throat. Actually, sir, about those biological compatibility tests I wanted to run. Not now, Pipsqueak. We need to increase the dosage, double it, no, triple it. We already did, sir, 5 times. The only noticeable effect was several humans commenting that the wine had interesting complexity and paired well with cheese. The situation only deteriorated from there. Reports flooded in from across the globe, each more devastating than the last. Humans in Georgia, the country, not the state, are using our enhanced wine for something called toasts and drinking it from actual tool horns. Wine consumption in Italy has actually increased. They're calling it a particularly good vintage. Sir, a human in California just used our most concentrated batch to make something called mulled wine and serve it hot. Admiral Blorp's gelatinous form had deflated so much he was practically a puddle. I don't understand. The compound should be affecting their neural pathways, making them susceptible to suggestion. Instead, they're having a great time, suggested an analyst, quickly ducking behind their console as Bleer shot them a withering look. Sir Pipsqueak finally managed to interrupt, waving his data pad frantically. I really think you should see these test results. It appears humans have developed a remarkable tolerance to psychoactive substances, particularly those delivered through alcoholic beverages. In fact, their bodies seem to process our mind control compound the same way they process alcohol, breaking it down into what Blur demanded, a rather pleasant aftertaste with notes of blackberry and oak. The command center fell silent, broken only by the sound of humans across the globe enjoying what they would later declare to be one of the best wine years in recent memory. Sir, one of the analysts said you might want to see this. Someone posted a review of our enhanced wine online. The screen displayed a wine blog post titled 2024's Mystery Vintage, a delightfully mind-bending experience by none other than Buck K. Thompson. Earth's most notorious wine critic, Blau, began to wonder if it was too late to go back to his original plan with the weaponized poetry. Buck Thompson had tasted some weird wines in his career. There was the infamous essence of Tire Fire Pinot Noir from Oregon and that Australian Shiraz that somehow tasted like weaponized potpourri. But this was different. He sat in his tasting room, surrounded by empty bottles from across the globe, his legendary palate trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. His latest video review had been paused mid-recording, the camera catching his puzzled expression as he consulted his notes, taking another pass at the 2024 Shadow Suspension Supicious. He muttered into his recorder notes of blackberry oak and attempted mind control finishes, long and complex, with subtle hints of alien invasion. He frowned, swirling another glass. Either I'm having a stroke, or someone's trying to conquer Earth through mediocre winemaking. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the Global Wine Authentication Board was having her own crisis. Her lab had been working overtime, analyzing samples of what she dubbed the incident vintage. These readings make no sense, she announced to her team, gesturing at the lab results. Every sample shows traces of an unknown compound that seems to Maria to be listening to me. Never her assistant looked up from where she'd been happily sipping the evidence. Sorry, boss, it's just really good wine. It kind of makes you want to submit to a higher power, stop drinking the evidence. Elena snatched the glass away. What do you mean, submit to a higher power? I don't know. Maria shrugged, just felt like maybe we should all unite under a singular galactic authority. Also, it pairs really well with Gouda. Elena's eyes narrowed. Years of wine authentication experience had taught her to spot even the subtlest signs of tampering, but this was beyond anything she'd seen before. She reached for her phone. Buckets, Elena. Remember that time you claimed you could taste the winemaker's emotional state in a Bordeaux? I owe you an apology. We've got a situation across the globe. Others were beginning to notice something was off. A sommelier in Paris reported that a particular vintage was giving him telepathic sommelier powers, though this turned out to be false when he failed to guess what wine his customers were thinking of ordering. A wine bar in Sydney had to be evacuated after patrons began spontaneously organizing into a hive mind, though they mostly used their collective consciousness to argue about pizza toppings. Buck Thompson, now fully convinced he wasn't having a stroke, had assembled a crack team of wine experts in his tasting room. They dubbed themselves the Grape. The Justice League, much to Elena's disapproval, looked at this pattern. Elena pointed to a map covered in wine stains and red string. Every major wine region was hit within weeks. This wasn't random, and check this out, Buck added, pulling up footage from various vineyards. Did these new wine critics, who showed up just before the contamination began, notice anything odd? The footage showed various suspicious characters, including one critic who seemed to have trouble maintaining a consistent number of limbs, and another who kept forgetting humans couldn't extend their necks 3 feet to reach the top shelf bottles. Also, Maria chimed in, having been banned from drinking anymore. Has anyone else noticed that every new vineyard worker hired in the past month is named either John Smith or Jane Smith, even the one with tentacles? Finally, Buck pulled out his piece de resistance, a wine bottle with a label that read Chateau Neural Subjugation 2024 Vintage. I found this in that weird new wine bar in Cleveland, the one that only opens during lunar eclipses and keeps trying to pay its taxes in space credits. Elle studied the bottle that's not a real shadow, and notes of submission to alien overlords aren't a real wine tasting note. Buck agreed, though I have to admit it does have excellent structure. So what you're saying, Maria, is that aliens have infiltrated Earth's wine industry in an apparent attempt at mind control, but failed because they didn't account for humanity's legendary alcohol tolerance. Exactly, Buck exclaimed. Also, they're terrible at winemaking. I mean, look at these tasting notes from Agent Snootsworth. Contains grape. That's it. That's his entire review. Elena began gathering her papers. We need to alert the authorities. The real question is, who do you call when aliens spike the planet's wine supply? I have an idea. Buck grinned, pulling out his phone. Remember my cousin Jack, the one who became a diplomat after that incident with the tequila and the Norwegian cruise ship? I think it's time for an intergalactic wine tasting. Ambassador Jack Martinez stood before the Galactic Council armed, with nothing but a briefcase full of Earth's finest spirits, and the kind of confidence that comes from having survived both diplomatic school and his uncle's moonshine. Distinguished members of the council, he began trying not to stare at Admiral Blorp, who had stress-jiggled himself into more of an anxiety puddle than his usual gelatinous form. We need to talk about your recent addition to our wine industry. High Counselor Zix twitched nervously. We have no idea what you're talking about, human. Perhaps you've had too much of your fermented grape ape juice. Oh, you mean this fermented grape juice. Jack placed a bottle on the podium. 2024 Shadow Neural Subjugation. I must say the mind control notes really bring out the tannins. A horrified gasp echoed through the chamber as Pete Squeak tried to hide behind his datapad, which was difficult considering the pad was smaller than he was. How did you know? Blur finally managed to reform enough to speak. Well, first of all, your wine critics need better cover stories. Nobody believed Nebraska was famous for its underwater vineyards, but mainly Jack grinned. You made one crucial mistake. You assumed wine was the strongest thing humans drink. He opened his briefcase, pulling out a series of bottles. Allow me to introduce you to some other Earth beverages. This is vodka, essentially potato juice that wants to fight you. This is tequila, which has been known to make humans think they can communicate with dolphins. And this, he held up a mason jar of clear liquid, is my uncle's moonshine. We use it to clean engine parts when we run out of actual cleaning supplies. The council leaned forward, simultaneously fascinated and horrified. You drink these voluntarily? Pipsqueak asked, scribbling notes frantically. Oh, that's just the beginning. Jack continued warming to his subject. We have drinks made from fermented honey, fermented rice, and fermented agave. Basically, if it contains sugar somewhere in history a human has tried to ferment it, we once accidentally discovered mead because we left honey out too long and decided to drink it anyway, but our mind control compound, BL protested weakly, is basically a light cocktail mixer compared to what we're used to. I mean, have you heard of absinthe? It's literally called the Green Fairy because it makes you see things. We drink it for fun. The council members were now passing around the bottles, examining them with a mixture of terror and admiration. Are you saying High Counselor DX has ventured that humans regularly consume substances stronger than our most potent mind-altering compounds for entertainment? Well, not just entertainment, Jack clarified. That sometimes we do it to win bets, or because it's Tuesday, or because someone said, what's the worst that could happen? Which, coincidentally, is probably what you said before launching this whole wine scheme, right? BL's color shifted to a deeply embarrassed envy. Perhaps because we underestimate human resilience. Perhaps Jack raised an eyebrow. Your mind control wine barely registers compared to what we call bottom shelf vodka. We have drinks that are literally flammable. We invented something called a four horseman that's just four different types of whiskey in one glass. We have beer so strong it's illegal in some countries. He pauses, noting the mixture of horror and intrigue on the alien faces. But you know what the really interesting thing is? Your compound actually improved some of our wines. Buck Thompson, our top wine critic, says it added fascinating complexity to several vintages. We're thinking of marketing it as a premium feature. You want to sell it. Pipsqueak's jaw dropped, which in a species meant it literally fell off and had to be reattached. Of course, though, we'll need to work out licensing fees, distribution rights, that sort of thing. After all, you did try to conquer our planet. The least you could do is let us profit from the attempt. The council chamber erupted in excited chittering as the implications sank in. Several members were already calculating potential profit margins, while others were cautiously sniffing the bottles Jack had brought. Jack smiled diplomatically. Shall we discuss terms? I suggest we do it over drinks. I brought enough glasses for everyone. Blur looked at the bottles, then at his failed invasion plan, then back at the bottles. You know what? Pour me a double. 1 year later, the first annual Intergalactic Wine and Spirits Festival was in full swing, transforming the Galactic Council headquarters into what could only be described as the universe's most ambitious cocktail party. Admiral Blorp, now head of intergalactic beverage relations, and significantly more relaxed after discovering martinis, hovered near the Earth booth, where Buck Thompson was conducting a wine tasting, now notices the subtle mind-bending qualities. Buck explained to a group of fascinated aliens, "We've refined the original invasion compound into what we call our conspiracy theory line. Each bottle makes you believe in a different outlandish, this red blend, for instance, convinces you that Earth's moon is actually a giant space egg," remarked a multi-eyed being, tentacles wrapped around a wine glass, and humans drink this knowing it will alter their perceptions. "Please," Buck scoffed. "We once invented a drink that makes you think you can dance. This is nothing nearby." Pipsqueak, now running a surprisingly successful consulting firm specializing in xenochemical methods with our psychoactive compounds, "We've created an entirely new category of spirits," he announced proudly. "We call it quantum liquor. Each bottle exists in multiple states of intoxication simultaneously until you observe its effects." Fascinating. Elena Rodriguez nodded, taking notes, though we might need to add a warning label about potential temporary dimension hopping at the diplomatic reception area. Ambassador Jack Martinez was teaching High Counselor Zix how to make cocktails, a task made more interesting by her insistence on mixing them with all 6 appendages simultaneously, the key to a good Manhattan. Jack explained, dodging a particularly enthusiastic shake, is to pretend you know what you're doing even when you absolutely don't, which, coincidentally, is also the key to most diplomatic relations, you know. JS clicked thoughtfully. "When we first discovered Earth, we thought you were a primitive species because you willingly consumed poison for pleasure. Now I realize that's what makes humans fascinating. You take things that should destroy you and turn them into art. And we're really, really good at building up tolerances to things that probably should have killed us." Jack agreed. "You should see what happens when you tell humans something's impossible. We take it as a personal challenge." Meanwhile, Agent Gloop, who had decided to maintain his Gerald Snutsworth persona and was now a legitimate wine critic, was judging the experimental wine category. "Ah, yes," he declared, swirling a glass of something that glowed in the dark. "I'm detecting notes of grape, but also temporal displacement and possibly a violation of several laws of physics. Excellent vintage." The festival had become the hottest ticket in the galaxy. Beings from across the universe came to sample Earth's beverages, each race discovering their own favorite. The Zorian developed a taste for craft beer. The Quantum Collective became oddly fascinated with bowed wine, and the silicon-based life forms found they could get surprisingly tipsy on mineral water in his private office, now decorated with both his failed invasion plans and an impressive wine collection. Admiral Blur raised a glass with Jack. You know, Bleer admitted his gelatinous form is now permanently tinted a relaxed shade of rose from regular wine consumption. This turned out much better than an invasion would have. Do you realize Earth's beverage exports now account for 30% of all galactic trade? Not bad for a species you thought you could conquer with spiked wine. Jack grinned, though I'm still not sure how you didn't notice all our other alcoholic beverages during your surveillance. We thought they were industrial cleaning products, Blur confessed, especially about something called Jägermeister. To be fair, we're still not entirely sure it isn't Jack laughing at failed invasions and successful drinks to humanity. Bleer raised his glass to the species that looked at deadly toxins and thought, I bet we could make this fun. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Pipsqueak frantically yelling something about someone mixing quantum liquor with moonshine, followed by the distinctive sound of someone briefly existing in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Just another normal day in humanity's newest tea industry. Intergalactic bartending.